SPACs are rising in popularity as a way for companies to go public. But what is a SPAC and how does it work? SPAC stands for Special Purpose Acquisition Company. These are also sometimes referred to as blank check companies or shell companies. They are called blank check companies or shell companies because they do not actually have any existing operations. These are companies that are formed with the sole purpose of acquiring or buying another company. The whole goal of this SPAC or shell company is to actually raise money in order to be able to buy another company and to be able to merge with it. So why would people be willing to give a SPAC their money? It seems a little bit strange to want to invest in a company that really has no existing operations, and it seems a little bit strange to invest in something when you don't know what company they are wanting to acquire. Well, there are several reasons that SPACs are able to raise money. Typically, they have reputable sponsors and investors behind the SPAC that are kind of running the whole operation and looking for those companies to acquire. And a lot of times these sponsors or investors are well-known names, people behind existing successful companies, or even celebrities. When you invest in a SPAC, you don't know which company they are actually trying to target and trying to acquire. So when you do invest in a SPAC, you are very much investing in the reputation of their team, their management, their sponsors. So that is where those well-known names come into play. So essentially, the pitch for a lot of these SPACs goes something like, "Hi, I'm Bill Ackman. Give me money and I'll find a unicorn." So then people who look up to Bill Ackman and potentially his investor friends or people who have worked with him in the past may feel more inclined to actually invest in this SPAC that he is behind because he has a certain reputation and certain knowledge within specific industries. The money that was raised goes into this interest-bearing account, which is essentially almost like an escrow account. They go out and they try to find a company that meets their set of criteria, and until that company is found, that money does not leave that interest-bearing account. SPACs have to find and acquire a company within a certain time frame, usually around 24 months, and if they are not able to find a company to acquire within that time, the money in the SPAC is returned to its investors. There are definitely benefits for these sponsors as well. They'll typically purchase founder shares, which are essentially shares that are sold at a very good price very early on, and this is essentially incentive for them to grow the company and for them to continue to increase revenue, because the larger stake that they actually have in this company and the more shares that they have, the more that they're going to want it to grow, because that just means that they'll be able to make more money. So that can be a good or a bad thing. It really just depends on how you view it and how much those sponsors are actually being incentivized. To understand what you're actually getting when you buy a SPAC and why these are becoming so popular, we need to first understand three of the main ways that a company can go public. These would be an IPO or an initial public offering, a direct offering, or a SPAC. With an IPO, which I will explain fully in a separate video, the process to actually go through this initial public offering, get this company approved, and through all of this process is very long, very tedious, and very intense for the companies. With an existing company, IPOs require a long underwriting process. If you've ever tried to buy a house, this is essentially the same thing as the underwriting process that you go through to buy it, where there are people who are checking all of your financial statements, all of like your past revenue, and pretty much anything that has to do with the company, they're going to check. It's going to take a very long time. But in addition to that, the underwriting process is also going to involve raising money from additional sponsors. It usually requires a roadshow, which is essentially going around and having to pitch this company and promote it to potential investors. Once that is done, and once they have gone through that whole long underwriting process of checking the financials and assets, then the company can finally go public. Most of the traditional IPO process is done through investment banks, and there are a lot of middlemen and people in between as this process goes on. A direct public offering is slightly less complicated than the traditional IPO process. Usually this is going to cut out the middlemen from the picture, so some of those investment banks and other people involved in between. In a direct public offering, it's the company directly selling securities to the public. This is sometimes done if a company can't afford the underwriting process or if they just don't want to deal with all of those middlemen. Slack is an example of a company that did a direct public offering. Then we have SPACs. If a company is acquired by a SPAC, this is usually the fastest route to going public. When a SPAC is formed, sometimes the sponsors behind the SPAC already have a target company that they want to acquire, and other times they aren't clear on the exact company that they want to acquire, but they have a certain list of criteria and in a particular industry, and they just go for the best company that they can find. Now, how it actually works, that SPAC or that shell company that we talked about earlier is going to go public through an IPO. Remember how we talked about IPOs having that long underwriting process? Well, for a SPAC, that process is much quicker because they don't have a really long history or intense financial statements, because remember, they're a shell company. They don't really have operations. Okay, so what do you get when you actually buy into a SPAC? With a SPAC, you're typically going to be buying in units. A unit is usually $10 a piece, and it will later split into common stock and warrants. Common stock is just a regular share of a company, but a warrant actually allows you to buy a share at a fixed price later on. When you buy a unit, it isn't always going to be a 1-to-1 ratio of common stock and warrants. So instead of getting 1 share of common stock and 1 warrant, you may only get 1 warrant for every 5 shares that you have. There are different ways that it's split up depending on the SPACs and depending on the companies, but that is just something to be aware of. So assuming that the SPAC actually finds a company, they are then going to merge with the company, and typically what will happen is the ticker symbol will change, which is that series of letters that represents a stock on the stock market. Once regulations are met and all of the paperwork is done, that merged company is now going to be public. All that means is that it's then available for people like you and me to buy on the stock exchanges. There are definitely still approval processes that they have to go through, but in general, a SPAC is going to go through much less scrutiny than a traditional IPO. That may be good for the company, but unfortunately, if not enough due diligence was done, some information can be overlooked or ignored, like we saw with the case of Nikola. SPACs can be beneficial for investors because it can give you a chance to potentially get in early on a company before that company merges and goes public. The warrants that you get with your units are kind of an incentive and almost like a reward for investors getting in early on these SPACs. Because an investor has those warrants, they have the option to purchase more shares below market value later on. If you choose not to use the warrants and you just want to cash out instead, you can do that as well. And that is one of the ways that an early investor in a SPAC can kind of have an advantage over the general public. If you want to learn more, be sure to subscribe to the channel for the next video on IPOs, or if you're watching this a week after I post it, I will insert the video right here. You can click on that and I will see you over there.